Hey people, today I want to clear up one of the biggest misconceptions amongst musicians. And that is the belief that drummers can simply reduce their volume without having to completely change the way they play their instrument. Don't get me wrong, being able to play the drums quietly is a very beneficial skill. You don't have to play at top volume to be impactful. Sometimes delicate tones are even more powerful and haunting. But the point is, playing your drums less loudly requires a very different approach. You can't naturally reduce your volume like you could if you were a guitarist reducing the volume of your amp. What we have to keep in mind when we play in a band is that every instrument has unique features and functions in very different ways. Over the years, we just got so used to seeing these instruments being played collectively in pop, rock or metal bands that it might feel as though it has always been that way. But think again, all of these instruments are unique in their design and use, and all of those instruments have their unique and specific history and spring from different sources. The drums are an acoustic instrument, just as are vocals, while the other instruments are electronic, meaning that when you play with other musicians in a rock, pop or metal band, you will inevitably combine acoustic and electric instruments, which asks every player to adjust accordingly to create a sound that feels cohesive. So what do you do as a drummer when a band member asks you to play less loudly during the rehearsal? The problem is that performing on the drums at a lower volume requires you to change the way you play, meaning the movement patterns change completely when you play less loudly. If you are practicing for a tour, a live concert or studio recordings, you have to bear in mind that you need to prepare in the same way as though you were playing live. So it just doesn't make any sense to play very quietly if you have to play at a higher volume in front of an audience in the end. Therefore, the drummer has to dictate the minimum sound level during rehearsals to be able to practice his or her drumming precisely as he or she would play in the desired setting. That doesn't mean that drummers just want to do their own thing or simply don't care about the other musicians. And please be kind. Don't use this as an excuse to play as loud as you can or just as loud as you want to. It has to be musical. Keep the musical goal in mind and practice just as you want the music to sound like. To be equipped for a live concert, you have to play precisely the same way that you would on stage, at precisely the same volume. So why don't you just tone it down a notch? Just play the Cajon instead. I mean, it's not as loud as the drums anyway. Heard that one before? But please let me make this clear. The Cajon is not a tiny drum set. It's an actual instrument in its own right and a completely different instrument from the drum set. Telling a drummer just to play the Cajon instead is like telling an electric bass guitar player just to play double bass instead. It just doesn't work that way. Yes, those instruments are related, and I guess a drummer can get a decent sound out of a Cajon with a little bit of practice. But still, they are different instruments and they require different approaches and different techniques. Just imagine a theater group having a dress rehearsal on a completely different stage from the one they will be performing on in the end. It's maybe half the size and has a different flooring. Yes, they will still be performing the same piece, but everything will just be a little bit off and they have to adjust. And it's not a good idea to be adjusting at the rehearsal right before the performance. The point of the dress rehearsal is that you will be adjusting to all the surroundings you will be having in the end when you perform. And just like that, the movement patterns when performing on the Cajon are totally different from when you are playing the drums. So it makes zero sense to use that instrument in rehearsal when you're really playing the drums on stage or in the studio. Another thing that you should consider as a drummer is how amplifying your set changes its sound. Once your drums are mic'd up, they automatically turn into a semi-acoustic instrument, meaning that the sound changes dramatically. Also, keep in mind that the way your drums sound on stage is entirely different from how they appear off stage, mic'd up or not. In a live setting, drums are usually amplified and engineered to make them fit for an audience. That, however, has very little to do with what you actually hear when you play on stage, when you sit behind your drum kit. To solve that problem, I can highly recommend asking someone else to play the drum set while taking the listener's perspective in front of the stage. That should give you a pretty good idea of how your drums act mic'd up and with the sound engineer mixing your drum signals, or how they sound in this particular acoustic location. If we go back to what I said earlier about the different characteristics of the most common band instruments, we can add that the way that each of them creates sound is very distinct. While the vocalist uses his body to produce sound, the guitarist sets strings in motion that are electronically amplified, and the drummer hits the drum head with his stick, which creates a sound that is then amplified. Just keep that in mind the next time you play with other musicians. Keep an open mind and try to use the differences and unique features of the instruments to serve the music that you are making together. Knowing what an instrument can and cannot do is an essential step in communicating better in a band setting and having realistic expectations. Designing your rehearsals with those things in mind can be highly beneficial in creating an atmosphere of mutual respect and should make working as a team a lot easier. Ultimately, your goal should be to deliver your best possible performance. Put your egos aside once again and let's work on getting your sound right for the next gig or studio session. Remember that the drums need to set the tone when it comes to the appropriate volume. Otherwise, you'd be stifling your band's ability to be prepared for your next show in the best way possible. In the hopes of more respectful rehearsals and great communication, I send you off into a lovely rest of your week. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe to see more videos about music, learning, and of course the drums. Hope to see you in the next one. Take care and bye bye.